Are you planning on shooting me, or can I come closer? Naren asked, holding his hands up in a show of surrender. The corridor smelled of melted steel and stale oxygen, a derelict outpost hallway where the overhead lights flickered in and out. He tried to keep his voice steady, but he couldn't hide the fact that he was completely out of his depth. Standing across from him was a tall, lithe alien woman with luminescent patterns shifting across her exposed arms. Her eyes were black as midnight, unblinking, and focused solely on him. A thin blade extended from her gloved fingertips, pointed at his chest. Even in the gloom, those glowing markings across her skin were unsettlingly beautiful, like living constellations dancing beneath her flesh. He took in a slow breath, reminding himself that he hadn't survived all those scavenging runs by being reckless. But the air tasted strange here, a tang that clung to his lungs and made his heart pound harder than it should. The woman moved a step forward, the light scraping of her boots against the metal floor echoing in the silence. Her stare was unwavering. She seemed equally cautious, though not afraid. If anything, she looked at him like he was a puzzle to be solved. Naren fought the urge to take a step back. He didn't want to show weakness. The last thing he needed was to let her sense that he was about to come apart at the seams. He tried humor instead. I get the feeling this is your territory, he said, managing a half-smile. I'm just passing through. Her voice, when it finally came, was low and resonant, surprisingly melodic in the claustrophobic corridor. No one just passes through Neuraxis Station anymore, she replied. At least, not alive. A flicker of curiosity crossed her otherwise stern features. You're alone? Naren nodded, swallowing his nerves. I lost my crew. They didn't make it. He didn't elaborate. The memory of the crash, the screech of metal and the flash of scorching fire from the ship's core, was too fresh. His chest constricted at the thought of them. He'd known the risks, but it still felt like a betrayal. He had survived while they were gone. He shook his head, focusing on the woman. I'm Naren, he said quietly. I promise I mean you no harm. She tilted her head. The luminescent swirls on her arms pulsed more vividly for a moment, a swirl of turquoise and lavender. I'm called Inali. Lower your hands, but do not reach for your weapon, she said, glancing at the holster at his waist. If you are as alone as you say, you will not survive long here. This place is a hunting ground for those who enjoy capturing outworlders. Naren relaxed his arms to his sides but kept them spread slightly to prove he wasn't trying anything. His heart was still pounding. He ran a quick mental checklist of the supplies he had strapped in a small bag over his shoulder. Med gel, a few flares, and some emergency rations. Nothing that would help him survive an outright attack, especially from the slavers rumored to prowl these old stations. He dared a question. Why are you here then? A faint smile crossed her lips, almost sad. Because I have nowhere else to go. She gestured down the corridor. Are you coming with me or not? I won't promise you safety, but I can show you which corridors are less likely to get you captured. He exhaled, relief blending with wariness. A strange warmth bloomed in his chest at her tone. It was oddly protective, though she wasn't exactly offering friendship. I'll follow, he said, stepping in line behind her. She walked without haste, and he found his gaze drifting along the curve of her back, the flutter of a thin cloak behind her shoulders, and the mesmerizing patterns on her bare arms and neck. He wondered if those luminescent spots served some biological function, heat regulation, communication, or maybe they were purely ornamental. He'd encountered dozens of species in his years as a freelance pilot and occasional scavenger, but none quite like her. They navigated the narrow hallway of the outpost, walls dented from old battles, flickering overhead lights giving everything a haunted hue. Small ventilation shafts lined the ceiling, though many were broken or venting cold air. A crackle of static in the background was a constant reminder that the station's electronics were decades past stable. Yet Inali seemed confident, brushing a hand along the wall as if attuning herself to the rhythms of the place. Naren found it impossible not to notice the faint glow emanating from the lines on her neck, like soft moonlight. He wanted to ask her about it but kept quiet. Conversation felt precarious. Instead, he just observed. The place was a labyrinth of rusted walkways, drifting dust motes, and half-illuminated doorways leading to who knew what. Occasionally, Anali would gesture for him to wait, while she listened, her ear fins twitching. He realized she had specialized hearing organs that folded back against her skull, slender, almost fin-like appendages that flickered with the same faint light as her arms. He'd seen a lot in the galaxy, but her presence stirred something he couldn't quite articulate. Caution, yes, but also an unexpected pull. They eventually reached a small alcove where a door panel sputtered with damaged electronics. She tapped a series of quick commands. The door slid open, revealing what looked like an old crew bunk area. The single overhead fixture gave the room a dull, flickering glow, but it was better than standing out in the hallway. Anali entered first, scanning the shadows, blade hand lowered. She took a moment before speaking again. "Lock the door from the inside," she said. "Just in case." Naren did as told. "How do you know about these corridors?" he asked softly, stepping further into the bunk room. It smelled dusty, but at least it felt marginally safer. She shrugged. "I've been here a while. I was dropped off." There was a tension in her tone that suggested the truth was more complicated than she was letting on. She surveyed him again with those wide black eyes. "You must be tired. There's water in that corner reservoir, though it may taste metallic. Watch your rations closely. Slavers typically raid supplies from the unclaimed outposts, so you're lucky you haven't been found." Her expression hardened as if to remind him that her help was pragmatic. "I've seen too many die here." Naren lowered himself onto a bunk, ignoring the way his body ached from his crash landing. An uneasy silence spread as they eyed each other. Her presence both comforted and unsettled him. She was unafraid, or if she was afraid, she disguised it behind that intense stare. "Thank you," he offered, wiping sweat and grime from his brow. "For not leaving me out there." Anali shifted her weight, the glow spots on her arms shifting to a deep violet that shimmered along the contour of her muscles. "Don't thank me," she murmured. "Survival is a matter of common interest." He dropped his gaze, trying not to stare too openly at the patterns on her skin. He found himself wanting to ask more questions. Was she exiled from her people? Had she been betrayed, or did she come here by choice for some reason? And why did he care so much about the answers? "Right," he said lamely. "Still, I appreciate it." She simply nodded and turned away, busying herself by rummaging through a small crate near the wall. He watched her movements, the graceful efficiency of her limbs. All he could hear was the hum of old machinery and the faint thud of his own heartbeat. He wondered how many others she'd encountered here, how many she had led to safety or left behind. The quiet tension in the space felt charged, though he couldn't tell if it was just his nerves or something else flickering between them. It made him uneasy, yet he couldn't deny an undercurrent of fascination. At length, she pulled out a tattered blanket and threw it in his direction. "It'll be cold soon," she said. "Get some sleep. We'll move again before the artificial morning cycle starts. That's when I've noticed more raiders active in this sector. They don't waste time with stealth, so we'll hear them coming, but it's best to stay on the move." Naren understood. He spread out the blanket, itching to ask 1,000 questions, but her expression discouraged further chatter. She was in control here, and he was the outsider, the supplicant. So he lay back on the bunk, letting the dull ache in his limbs lull him toward uneasy rest. The last thing he remembered before falling asleep was the faint flicker of Anali's glow spots as she stood guard near the door, poised and silent, like a sentinel carved from living light. He awoke after what felt like minutes, though the flickering overhead told him hours must have passed. The outpost's artificial day-night cycle was in disarray, so it was impossible to know for sure. Sitting up, he scanned the cramped bunk room. Anali was perched on the edge of an old metal table. Her cloak partially covered her slender frame, the only movement coming from the gentle rise and fall of her breath. She was staring at him intently, though, those black eyes unwavering. He cleared his throat, feeling an uncomfortable stir in his chest. "I guess you didn't sleep," he said quietly. She shook her head, her ear fins fluttering briefly. I rest differently than you do, she replied. Besides, someone had to keep watch. I can sense vibrations in the station's infrastructure. If anyone tries to open the doors in our vicinity, I'll know. He believed her. Good, he said. He rubbed his eyes, dragging a hand through his short dark hair. He needed to figure out a plan, or at least find a way to contact someone who could rescue him. But out here, communication arrays were defunct, and even if they weren't, it might take weeks for help to arrive. Meanwhile, Ainali seemed to have survived alone, which sparked questions he wasn't sure he should ask yet. He swung his legs over the side of the bunk. I'm going to check the corridor. Need anything from me? She turned those black eyes on him, the faint swirl of color on her arms flickering violet. Stay alive, she said coolly. We can't linger here too long. The rooms deeper in the station might have working consoles or salvage. You came here looking for something, didn't you? He hesitated, swallowing a wave of guilt. I was paid to find valuable salvage by a corporate sponsor. Parts, rare alloys, whatever we could scavenge from old stations. My crew joined for the promise of a big payout. But our ship malfunctioned on approach. The engines died and... He trailed off, letting the memory fade. So yeah, I was looking for salvage, ironically. I ended up the salvage. Ainali's lips curved into a wry smile. Greedy corporations, always searching for scraps of old tech. They often forget how many people die chasing those fortunes. He nodded. I'm not proud of it, he admitted softly. But for me, it was a job. And now I'm stuck here, same as you. Something in her expression shifted. Perhaps she respected his honesty. They decided to move out. Naren gathered his meager belongings, and they unsealed the door to the corridor. The smell of the station assaulted him again, a mix of stale air and rust. Ainali led the way, each step purposeful. They passed several locked doors that looked like they'd been welded shut from the inside. When they found one partially open, she motioned for him to stay back while she inspected it. The abandoned storage room beyond was ransacked, crates overturned, their contents stripped. No sign of life. The tension in his shoulders eased fractionally, but the quietness put him on edge. Places like this had a knack for harboring hidden threats. They pressed on. The corridor forked, one path dimly lit, the other pitch black. Ainali touched the wall and closed her eyes, her ear fins spreading slightly as if she were sensing vibrations. Naren watched with fascination. Her glow spots brightened softly around her neck and shoulders, a slow ripple of light. She opened her eyes moments later. Something's moving down the lit corridor, she said. We take the dark one. He didn't argue. Without a functioning flashlight, he was forced to rely on Ainali's faint bioluminescence to guide him. The deeper they went, the more the station's metallic groans echoed around them. Naren's pulse quickened. It was easy to imagine creatures lurking just out of sight. Eventually, they emerged into a larger chamber strewn with broken consoles and dusty monitors. Perhaps it had once been a command center. Torn wires dangled from the ceiling, sparks occasionally flaring. Ainali stepped forward, carefully skirting a pile of shattered glass. If we can power one of these consoles, we might find a map or a schematics layout. Maybe even partial station logs. Naren caught up, carefully stepping around the debris. Worth a shot, he agreed, voice hushed. He brushed away dust from one console, but the screen was cracked. He tried toggling a switch to see if any power remained, but all he got was a feeble static hiss. Undeterred, he moved to the next one, which looked marginally more intact. I used to work as a pilot, but I can do basic console reboots, he said, hoping to establish some sense of camaraderie. Did you learn to use these systems? Ainali nodded, though her attention was on a panel she was prying open with her blade. I've taught myself a lot since I got stranded. My people's technology isn't so different in logic from yours, just the aesthetics vary. She managed to pop open the panel, revealing a mess of wires, and set to work reconfiguring them with nimble fingers. Naren watched the flex of her arms, the luminescent patterns shifting with her movements in an almost hypnotic dance. He forced himself to focus on the wires in his own panel. After a few moments of fiddling, a faint hum resonated through the console, and a small portion of the screen lit up. "Got something," he said, trying not to sound too pleased with himself. A battered station map flickered into view, fragmented with missing data blocks. Anali stepped beside him, close enough that he caught a whiff of her scent, something akin to night-blooming flowers with a metallic tang. She tapped at the map, and he felt a soft brush of her shoulder against his. That fleeting contact made his chest tighten. "Here," she said, pointing to a blinking sector outline. "This must be the upper docking bay. If the array still works, we could transmit a distress signal. But it's on the other side of the station, and we'll have to pass through multiple corridors I know are used by raiders." She frowned. "They likely have traps set." Naren grimaced. "So we can either stay hidden, risk never being found, or we take a chance on the docking bay and try to call for help." She angled her head, the lines on her neck pulsing softly. "That is our dilemma." Her gaze flicked to him. "But I assume you want to get out of here." "I do too." There was a moment of unspoken tension in the silence that followed. She had just revealed her desire to leave. Naren had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed gave him a sense of relief. They might be on the same side. "Then let's try," he said, turning to look at her. "We'll be careful." She inhaled, closing her eyes for a moment. The swirl of color on her arms darkened to an almost electric blue. Then she reopened them. "Yes. But first, we need rest and supplies. There's an auxiliary med bay not far from here. If it hasn't been looted, it might have something to help with your injuries." Only then did he realize the cut on his arm from the crash had bled through his makeshift bandage. His shirt sleeve was stained, though the wound felt numb now. "Right," he said softly, swallowing as the rush of adrenaline started to fade, leaving an ache that radiated through his body. "Lead the way." They continued on, stepping back into the corridor, retracing their route based on the partial map they'd seen. Despite the gloom, Naren found himself acutely aware of Anali's presence, the slight glow radiating from her as his guide in the darkness. The entire time, a low hum of tension buzzed between them. He wasn't sure if it stemmed from the immediate danger of raiders or the strange attraction that kept tugging at him whenever he caught sight of her. Maybe both. Soon they found a door that read, "Auxiliary Med Station," in faded letters. Naren tried the panel, but it refused to open. Anali tapped a control node on the side, but nothing happened. She exhaled in frustration. "Power's dead here. Stand back." With a swift motion, she used the blade at her fingertip to pry open a maintenance hatch near the door's base. Inside were manual release levers. She motioned for him to pull one in unison with her. They yanked together, metal screeching as the door slid halfway open. Naren ducked through the gap first, scanning the small chamber beyond. Sparse lighting flickered from a single functioning fixture, revealing a row of med pods along the wall, all deactivated. Cabinets lined the opposite side, some with their doors ripped off, supplies gone. But a few drawers were intact, sealed with rusted locks. "Better than nothing," he said, motioning for Anali to follow. She slipped in gracefully, her glow reflecting off the polished metal surfaces. He couldn't help but notice how the darkness accentuated the luminous lines decorating her body. They searched methodically. Anali found a small crate with med packs. She lifted it, tested its weight, and handed one to Naren. He opened it to find bandages, disinfectant, some basic painkillers. Relief washed over him. "This is good. Could be worth a lot in a place like this," he said as he got to work cleaning the wound on his arm. A sharp hiss escaped his mouth when the disinfectant touched raw skin, and he grimaced. "I'll manage," he muttered. She observed him for a moment before stepping closer. "Let me," she said, and gently nudged his hand away. He froze, unsure, but let her take the disinfectant. Her touch was surprisingly gentle as she dabbed at the wound. Every brush of her fingers sent a slight tremor through his nerves. He glanced up, meeting her eyes. The tension between them felt tangible. He found himself swallowing, trying to ignore the odd flutter of heat pulsing in his chest. Ainali finished cleaning the wound and applied a self-sealing bandage that glowed faintly with an embedded healing tech. "These are advanced," she commented. "Strange to find them here. Perhaps they were overlooked by raiders." He nodded, exhaling as the immediate sting subsided. "Guess we got lucky." He still felt oddly exposed with her so close, gazing at his injured arm with those deep black eyes. Her own luminescent patterns shifted to a calmer shade of turquoise, and the moment lingered, unspoken questions pressing between them. She looked like she wanted to say something, but instead she moved away, returning to rummage in the medbay cabinets. Naren flexed his arm, feeling a wave of gratitude, and something else. He reminded himself that survival was the priority. Everything else had to be secondary. The station groaned in the distance, a hollow metallic moan that made them both glance toward the door. "We should go," she said softly, gathering her findings into a small satchel. "There's an abandoned living quarter not far. We can barricade ourselves in for a few hours, then try for the docking bay." Without protest, he followed her again into the corridor. The overhead lights continued their erratic flicker, giving the unsettling impression that everything was stuttering in and out of existence. Around a bend, they caught a distant glimpse of movement, shadows drifting along the far corridor. Ainali gripped Naren's arm, pulling him behind a rusted panel to hide. Both of them pressed close in the narrow space breath held. He could feel her body heat against him, the gentle thrum of her bioluminescence pulsing. He forced himself to stay still, ignoring the sudden pounding of his heart. Footsteps reverberated along the metal walkway, a group of raiders, from the sound of it. One muttered in a harsh dialect, barking orders to search the area. They passed dangerously close, but eventually the noise faded. Naren let out a silent breath, eyes flicking to Ainali. Her expression was tense, and the glow spots on her arms had gone a darker, more subdued shade. She carefully peered out, ensuring the coast was clear, then motioned for him to follow. They found a door that looked partially functional and slipped inside. It appeared to be an old rec room, with battered chairs strewn about. A few shattered monitors were mounted on the walls. "Stay here," she whispered. "I'll check the perimeter." Naren nodded, chest still tight from adrenaline. He watched as she crept through an adjoining hall. Finally alone, he let out a shuddering breath and tried to steady his nerves. He sank into one of the chairs, ignoring the faint odor of rotting upholstery. His mind whirled with everything that had happened in the last day, the crash, the uncertainty, the strange partnership forming with Ainali. She was fierce, guarded, yet there was a vulnerability beneath the surface he sensed. Not that he could blame her for being cautious. This station was full of threats. He just hoped they could make it to that docking bay. If they could transmit a distress call, maybe a passing freighter would pick up their signal. He was so lost in thought he barely registered her return until she placed a hand on his shoulder. He jumped slightly. "Easy," she said, voice hushed. "They're gone for now. We can rest, but we should do so quietly." She glanced around the room. "These seats won't be comfortable, but it's safer than bunking out in the open." She sounded exhausted but determined. "Thanks," he murmured, patting the seat next to him. "You can sit too, you know." Ainali gave him a measured look, then carefully settled into the next chair. She let her cloak fall open, revealing the smooth, scaled texture of her arms and shoulders. Naren could see that her glow was slightly diminished, as if she were running low on energy. "Your luminescent patterns?" he ventured to ask. "Do they change with your mood, or something else?" She glanced down at her arms, flexing her long fingers. "Both," she answered quietly. "My emotions can color them, but they also respond to external stimuli, temperature, environment, even empathic resonance if I trust the individual close by." Her gaze flicked to him, and something raw passed in her expression. "My people used to share elaborate stories through the dance of our markings. That was before before I came to be here." He watched her carefully, noticing the sorrow in her eyes. "I'm sorry," he said. "If you don't mind me asking, did you get stranded or exiled?" she said firmly, cutting him off. She paused, as if wrestling with the memory. I was set adrift by a rival faction from my homeworld. They sold me to slavers, who left me here when I tried to escape. They must have thought I'd starve or get killed by local raiders. Yet I managed to survive. Naren felt a surge of anger on her behalf, followed by a sense of awe at her resilience. That's horrific, he said, meaning it. But you're alive. You've clearly outlasted them. She nodded, silent for a moment. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly as she leaned back in the chair, letting her head tilt against the battered upholstery. You can understand, then, why I don't trust easily. He tried to smile reassuringly. I get it. In my line of work, I've seen betrayal too. Not as personal as what happened to you, but enough to know caution is smart. They sat there for a stretch of time, quiet except for the distant hum of the station's broken systems. Finally, Naren closed his eyes. Exhaustion was seeping into his bones. He couldn't keep his eyes open much longer. Before he drifted off, he felt a subtle pressure on his arm. Opening his eyes, he saw Inali had let her hand rest over his. Her gaze was soft, though her posture remained guarded. A faint swirl of turquoise light traced along her forearm. It was a tentative gesture of trust or gratitude, he couldn't tell which. But it was enough to fill him with warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. He let his hand stay beneath hers, a shared moment in the darkness. When they eventually woke, there was no telling how many hours had passed. The station's schedule was perpetually broken. Ainali stirred first, pulling her hand back. She rose to her feet and scanned the room, ear fins shifting. Naren stood as well, massaging the stiffness from his neck. Ready? He asked quietly, trying to keep his voice from trembling with leftover grogginess. She nodded. We should make our move before the raiders circle back. She led him out into the corridor once more, quietly navigating the twisting halls. The tension never vanished. Every distant clang or hiss of machinery made their nerves spike, but they pressed on. Sometimes they had to duck behind corners while rough voices echoed down the walkways. Other times, they found themselves in total silence, the station's own hush giving them permission to breathe. At length, they reached a wide chamber with a high ceiling, a faint glow filtering in from overhead windows that looked out onto the stars. It was a respite from the claustrophobic corridors. A massive sign overhead read, Cafeteria, though the space was now scattered with broken tables and scattered debris. Ainali scanned the area carefully and pointed to a smaller side door that presumably led to the kitchens. Might be storage there. Maybe some leftover rations. Naren nodded, following her in. The kitchen area was a wreck, counters overturned, cupboards emptied. But in a corner, they found a sealed compartment with emergency meal packs. He pried it open, and a puff of stale air escaped. Inside were vacuum-sealed bars that might still be edible. He grinned, triumphant. We won't starve today. Ainali smiled back, taking a bar and examining it. Her smile was fleeting, though, as if it pained her to acknowledge relief. Still, she slipped the bars into her satchel. We'll need every advantage, she said. They decided to rest for a moment there. The large windows overhead provided a partial view of the starfield outside, and Naren found himself gazing up, longing to be back among them in a functioning ship. You ever miss it? Being out there? He asked quietly, glancing at Ainali. She followed his gaze. I miss my home, though it's gone for me. Perhaps if we escape, I'll wander the stars. No single place to claim me. He felt a pang of empathy. Well, if it helps, I've got no real home either. I lived transport job to transport job. Never stayed in one place. I guess we have that in common. Her eyes flicked to him. That's not necessarily comforting. She teased gently, a slight smile tugging at her lips. Then, with a seriousness that made his breath catch, she added, But perhaps it's something that can bind us for now. Naren forced himself to look away, heart pounding. When he caught his own reflection in a broken piece of metal, he realized just how haggard he looked, dirt-smeared face, stubble, eyes ringed with fatigue. And yet, when he glanced at Ainali's reflection, he saw her luminescent lines shimmering softly, as if they responded to his silent observation. His pulse skipped. He wasn't sure how, but an unspoken connection was growing between them. They finished eating the meal bars and set out again, carefully picking their route based on the partial map they remembered. Ainali paused occasionally, checking the corridor with her heightened senses. Twice they had to detour around collapsed sections of the station, crawling through narrow maintenance shafts. That forced them into close proximity, her slender figure just inches ahead of him. He tried to keep his breathing steady, but each time she brushed against him, that electric awareness crackled down his spine. Eventually, they found themselves in a sector that seemed more intact, with corridors wide enough to suggest they were nearing a central hub. They hid behind some large cargo crates when they spotted a pair of raiders standing guard at a sealed door. Both wore mismatched armor, scarred and battered, their weapons drawn. Ainali gestured for Naren to stay silent, pressing a single finger to her lips. He nodded, adrenaline flooding his system. As they peered from behind the crates, they heard the raiders talking in a coarse dialect. Some words were half intelligible. Her distinct glow, capture alive, bounty. Naren's stomach twisted. They had to be talking about Ainali, or at least about her species. She tensed beside him, her markings flickering with a surge of alarm. He leaned in, whispering into her ear. We need another route. The warmth of her skin so close made his heart pound in an unnerving way. But their predicament snapped him back to focus. She nodded, gesturing that they back away carefully. The corridor behind them was blocked by rubble, forcing them to circle around. They moved as silently as possible, hearts hammering with each step. Finally, they reached another passage that branched off, hopefully taking them around the guarded door. The tension was high enough that Naren could feel sweat trickling down his temple. They passed a partially collapsed portion of the floor, crossing a narrow metal beam that extended over a jagged hole. One wrong move, and they'd tumble into the darkness below. Ainali went first, arms out, balancing gracefully. Naren followed, breath tight. About halfway across, the beam shuddered, letting out a groan that made him freeze. Ainali turned back, eyes wide, luminescent filaments around her neck pulsing. Slow, she whispered, her voice echoing in the hollow darkness. He inched forward, focusing on each footstep. Just as he reached her, the beam creaked again. A loud snapping noise made them both lurch. She grabbed his wrist, pulling him forward. They toppled onto the stable edge of the floor as the beam gave way behind them, crashing into the depths. Dust and debris billowed up. He ended up half on top of her, gasping. She made a soft sound of discomfort, pinned under his weight. Quickly he shifted off, panting. Sorry, he breathed. You all right? Ainali let out a soft cough, brushing plaster dust from her hair. I'm fine, she said, though her voice quivered slightly. She propped herself up on an elbow. Their faces were close enough that he could see the subtle swirl of turquoise in her eyes, the parted shape of her lips. Neither moved for a moment, and time seemed to freeze. The entire station's gloom receded, leaving just the heat between them. With a tentative reach, he touched her cheek, brushing away a streak of dust. She didn't flinch, her stare locked on his. But then footsteps echoed in the corridor behind them. Someone must have heard the collapse. They snapped back to awareness. Scrambling to their feet, they hurried down the corridor, hearts pounding in unison. Adrenaline powered them forward until they ducked into an adjacent side door that slid open with a strained hiss. Inside was a large storage chamber filled with stacked crates. They hurried behind a tower of them, listening as the voices and footsteps drew nearer outside. Naren stifled his breathing, glancing sideways at Ainali, who crouched beside him, blade at the ready. A rough voice called out in the corridor. Search this area! Something caused that collapse. Might have been them. Another voice responded, and boots stomped around. Naren's mind raced. They were cornered if the raiders decided to search the storage room thoroughly. Slowly, he reached for his sidearm. Ainali's gaze dropped to his weapon, and she gave him a subtle shake of the head, as if cautioning him. He nodded, releasing the grip. Shooting their way out might cause more trouble than it solved. Minutes dragged on, tension thick. Eventually, the voices faded once more, the heavy thud of boots retreating. Only when the silence was absolute did Anali exhale. Naren followed suit, letting the tension drain from his shoulders. They remained hidden a few minutes longer, just to be sure. Finally, she pressed a hand to his chest as if to hold him back. "Wait!" she whispered, ear fins twitching. Her luminous markings glowed faintly, and after a few seconds she nodded. "They're gone," she breathed. "For now." He let out a shaky breath, heart still pounding like a war drum. "We can't keep having close calls like that," he muttered. "We need a better plan." Anali agreed with a grave look. "If we can bypass them, get to the docking bay, maybe we can lock down the corridors behind us." She flicked her gaze at his bandaged arm. "At least you're not wounded badly. I'd have trouble defending both of us if you were incapacitated." A wry half-smile crossed his face. "I'll do my best not to get shot," he murmured. There was a moment of almost playful banter in his tone, which felt incongruous with their dire situation. Yet it helped ease some of the tension. They stepped deeper into the storage room, noticing a set of old mechanical lifts in the back. A sign overhead read, "Docking access restricted," though the door was locked. They moved closer, inspecting the control panel. It flickered with red error messages. "Let me see if I can override it," Naren said. He tapped at the keys, and lights scrolled across the panel. The language was partly scrambled, data corrupted. "Damn, it's more locked down than I expected. The station's subroutines might have quarantined this sector for safety reasons." Anali placed her hand over his, carefully guiding him to a secondary set of controls. Her skin was cool, her luminescence a soothing lavender. "Try the manual override," she suggested, pointing to a backup system. He nodded, heart thudding at the way she hovered so close. He typed in a few guesses, crossing his fingers. With a sputter, the console beeped green, and the door slid partially open, revealing a dark corridor beyond. They stood at the threshold, sharing a glance. "No turning back," he said, forcing a small smile. "No," she agreed, her voice barely more than a whisper. "We press on." Inside, the corridor was claustrophobic, narrower than the others. Thick cables lined the walls, and the overhead lights were almost non-existent. They used the faint glow from Anali's skin and a small emergency lamp Naren found in the storage room. Every step echoed ominously. A rancid smell lingered, as if something had died here long ago. He tried not to think about it. His mind buzzed with questions about Anali's past, about how they might survive. But the only thing that truly mattered was escaping. They reached another sealed hatch that presumably led into the docking bay. This hatch bore scuff marks and signs of forced entry. Anali tensed, pressing her ear fins against the metal to listen. Naren swallowed, adrenaline spiking again. If there were raiders inside, they'd have to fight. Slowly, he raised his sidearm, heart pounding. Anali gave him a nod, placed a hand on the manual release, and pulled. With a grinding shriek, the hatch opened, revealing a scene beyond that made Naren's breath catch. The docking bay was enormous, with a massive panoramic window opening to the starfield. Several derelict ships were scattered around, in varying states of disrepair. A tangle of scaffolding loomed overhead, and flickering floodlights cast dancing shadows. In the center of the bay, an impromptu encampment had been erected, a half-dozen battered tents, cargo containers repurposed as living quarters. Around it milled at least 8 or 9 raiders, heavily armed and alert. Naren muttered a curse under his breath, scanning the perimeter. "This isn't good," he whispered. "They've set up right where we need to be." Anali's expression was grim. "They must be controlling any possible exit from the station." She pointed to a dais near the far wall, where a tall communication array towered. "That looks like our best bet to send a distress call. But with them stationed here..." He considered their options. They didn't have the resources for a full-on assault. Even if they tried, the odds of being shot on sight were high. "We need a diversion," he murmured. "Or a way to slip past them unseen." She gave a tight nod. I might be able to cause a power surge that draws them away. If we can get to the maintenance console on the upper scaffolding, we could force an overload in the sub-lighting system. That might create enough chaos. It was as good a plan as any. Carefully, they slipped back into the corridor, making their way to a flight of stairs that climbed into the overhead scaffolding. Once on the metal catwalks, they crouched low, peering down at the raiders below. From here, they could see how the encampment sprawled across the bay. In the distance, Naren spotted what looked like a functional shuttle, albeit small. If they somehow got the doors open, that shuttle might offer a direct path to escape. Quietly, Ainali pried open a junction box on the catwalk, and sparks danced around her blade as she cut through wires. She whispered, "When the lights blow, we have maybe 30 seconds before they reset. That's our window to reach the Comare." She handed Naren a small spool of wire. "Tie those two leads together when I say." He positioned himself near the junction, trying not to let his hands shake. He watched as she exposed a cluster of cables that pulsed with energy. Her luminescent patterns mirrored the quickening current, flaring in time with each spark. Her face was illuminated by the flickering arcs, and for a moment, her expression was mesmerizing, fierce, focused, and undeniably beautiful. A wave of protective instinct washed over him. He wanted her safe, away from this place. She caught his gaze, her lips parting as if reading his thoughts. But she simply said, "No," and he twisted the wires together. A surge of energy crackled, and the overhead floodlights died instantly, plunging the bay into near-total darkness. Shouts echoed from below as the raiders scrambled for flashlights, cursing. A couple of random beams of light flickered around. Together, Naren and Ainali dashed across the catwalk, heading for the ladder that led down to the Comare. The metal rang beneath their feet, but the chaos below masked their movements. The darkness clung to them like a cloak, and they slipped behind containers, hearts hammering. Naren's pulse thundered in his ears. With each passing second, he expected a shout or a gunshot. But the raiders seemed more concerned with restoring the lights. They reached the Comare's console, hidden behind a half-collapsed divider. Ainali knelt, quickly tapping commands into the antiquated system. Naren kept watch, peering around the edge of the divider. He could see several raiders shining flashlights around, barking orders. At any moment, they might come too close. He tried to calm his breathing, but adrenaline spiked every nerve. Behind him, he heard Ainali mutter, "Come on, come on!" The console beeped. "I think it's powering up." She tapped furiously, her markings flaring with anxious color. The screen flickered, and a faint hum rose, like a voice from decades past. "We're in. Now to configure a distress signal. If we're lucky, someone patrolling the sector might pick it up." "Do it," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder. Her face was inches from his, sweat beading on her brow as she concentrated. He felt a surge of admiration that bordered on affection. She was incredible, resourceful, determined. That moment of awe almost cost them. He snapped his gaze back to see a flashlight beam sweeping toward their position. "Down!" he hissed, pulling her with him. They crouched low, hearts pounding. The beam passed overhead. Voices barked in the gloom. Then the lights in the bay sputtered to life again, the system reboot kicking in. Ainali shut her eyes, biting back a curse. They were still hidden by the collapsed divider, but now the raiders could see again. "I set the distress call to auto-broadcast," she breathed into his ear. "If a ship's nearby, they might get our coordinates. But we still need to get out of here. They'll figure out what we did soon enough. We can't just wait for rescue in a station full of raiders," Naren murmured, glancing around for an escape route. His eyes landed on the small shuttle. It was battered, but maybe it had enough power to exit. "The shuttle," he said, nodding toward it. "If it's functional, we can override the bay doors and take our chances with vacuum launch." Ainali grimaced. "Risky. But we have no other options." She checked the console's readout one last time, then nodded. "Let's go." They crawled to the edge of the divider, scanning for an opening. Several raiders were still clustered near the main power junction, cursing about the surge, while others were moving in pairs with flashlights, methodically searching corners. Getting to that shuttle without being spotted was going to take every ounce of stealth they had. They slipped from cover to cover, ducking behind crates. Naren's heart hammered in his throat as they froze whenever a raider's gaze swept near. Step by agonizing step, they made progress. But as they neared the shuttle's open ramp, a shout rang out behind them. Intruders! The sharp crack of a blaster bolt seared past them, slamming into a metal crate with a sizzle of molten metal. Naren and Ainali sprinted the last few meters, adrenaline coursing like fire through their veins. Ainali leaped onto the shuttle's ramp first, twisting midair to fling a small device behind her. It clattered on the ground between the crates. Then came a flash of light and a deafening bang, some sort of makeshift flash grenade. The raiders yelled, momentarily blinded, giving Naren time to scramble aboard. They slammed the hatch closed as blaster fire rattled the hull. Inside, the shuttle was cramped, the cockpit lined with dusty controls. Naren lunged forward, throwing himself into the pilot's seat. Hold on! He shouted. Ainali jammed the ramp mechanism shut, then hurried to the co-pilot's station. He fumbled with the ignition. The console sputtered, and for a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then a dim glow lit up the readouts. Come on, baby! He muttered to the battered shuttle, coaxing it to life. Outside, the clang of boots on metal grew louder as raiders converged on the vessel. Another blaster shot reverberated against the hull. Naren slammed the thruster control forward. The engines coughed, then roared. The shuttle jerked upward, hovering a few meters above the bay floor. Ainali quickly accessed the docking clamp controls, bypassing the security that kept the bay doors locked. I've almost got it, she hissed through gritted teeth. A hail of gunfire sparked off the shuttle's underside, causing them both to jolt. Warning lights began flashing. They had to get out now or risk being shot out of the sky. Finally, Ainali let out a triumphant cry. Doors opening! With a tortured groan, the massive docking doors slid apart, revealing the star-speckled vacuum beyond. Naren seized the stick, guiding the shuttle forward. Air rushed out in a violent gust, sending loose debris, and a few unlucky raiders, tumbling into the void. They soared out of the bay, the blackness of space greeting them like a promise of freedom. For a heart-stopping moment, Naren wrestled with the controls, ensuring they didn't spin out of control. Then the shuttle stabilized, and they were clear of the station. Through the cockpit window, they could see the battered shape of Nearaxis Station behind them, rotating slowly in the cosmic darkness. A wave of relief crashed over Naren so intense, he almost laughed. We made it, he said, half disbelieving. Ainali exhaled, leaning back in her seat. Her luminous markings glowed brighter, as if in celebration. For now, she murmured. But we're in a damaged shuttle with limited fuel, drifting. And we have no guarantee that the distress call reached anyone. Naren checked the consoles. The readouts showed minimal fuel, life support functioning at partial capacity, and the navigation array in critical condition. Still, it was better than being shot at by raiders. He spared a glance at Ainali, his chest tightening at how grateful he was just to be alive with her here. We'll figure it out, he said softly. We have to. In the hours that followed, they tried various methods to boost the shuttle's signal or repair the comm array. They found a small hold containing meager supplies, enough to last a few days, maybe. Exhausted, they finally collapsed on the shuttle's narrow bench seats. For a while neither spoke, both lost in their own swirl of thoughts. Then Naren let out a long breath. Thank you, he said, turning his head to look at her. You saved my life more times than I can count back there. She hesitated, her dark eyes meeting his. You saved mine as well, she said. Neither of us would have made it alone. A subtle smile touched her lips. She reached over, her fingers brushing against his bandaged arm, checking to see if it was okay. The contact made his chest tighten again. You're hurt, she murmured. Let me see. He pushed himself up, letting her unwrap the makeshift bandage. Beneath, the self-sealing patch from the med station had done its work, though the skin was still raw around the edges. She pressed gently, her glowing fingertips tracing a line around the newly closed wound, and a tingling warmth spread. That feels nice," he said, voice catching. He realized with mild embarrassment that her proximity, her touch, were doing things to his head. He swallowed hard. "Your back is tense," she observed quietly, her gaze drifting to the lines of stress in his posture. "Might be the crash, or the constant stress." He gave a hollow laugh. "Who isn't tense after that?" He tried to shift, wincing as the ache in his spine protested. She angled her head, studying him with a thoughtful expression, then gestured for him to turn around. He hesitated, uncertain, but curiosity got the better of him. He pivoted on the bench, letting her position herself behind him. Her hands found his shoulders, pressing gently. The sudden sensation of her palms against his back was enough to make him inhale sharply. The warmth of her touch, combined with the faint luminescence that seemed to pulse with each slow breath she took, made his head spin. She massaged carefully, kneading the muscles around his neck and down the line of his spine. He felt tension melting away under her skilled hands, a wave of surprising relief that blurred the edges of his thoughts. Ainali leaned forward, her breath fanning across the back of his neck. "Relax," she murmured, voice low. He tried to do as instructed, letting her fingers work their magic. A deep groan escaped his chest as tight knots loosened. He had never experienced such a blend of soothing contact and electric awareness. His mind drifted to the many close calls they'd shared, the battles they'd fought side by side. The line between weariness and longing in his heart had blurred into something else entirely. After a few minutes, his entire body felt lighter, lulled by a sense of closeness he'd rarely allowed himself to feel with anyone. He could smell her subtle scent again, like cosmic flowers with an undertone of something wilder. A longing rose in him that he tried to keep in check. They were just two survivors on a drifting shuttle, trying not to die out in the cold of space. He shouldn't let his mind go where it was going. Yet when she eased her hands down his sides and leaned closer, pressing against his back, he could feel the gentle press of her chest and the soft glow where her markings made contact with his shirt. He couldn't stop the quiet gasp that escaped him. Something in the air shifted, a crackle of energy. She paused, her fingers lingering on his ribs. "Naren," she whispered. He turned his head slightly, seeing her over his shoulder. The faint lights of the shuttle's console illuminated her face, the luminous markings around her collarbones shimmering with an inner glow. She looked both tentative and determined, a mix of vulnerability and strength. Their eyes locked, and for a moment, the truth was unavoidable. They wanted each other, despite the danger, the strangeness, the entire galaxy stacked against them. In the next breath, she slid around to his side, and he found himself facing her. Everything else fell away as they looked at each other. The tension that had been building since the corridors of Neuraxis Station surged to the surface. He reached up, tentatively resting his palm against her cheek. She didn't pull away. Instead, she closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. The soft glow of her markings brightened. He inhaled her scent, leaning in closer until his forehead touched hers. The moment stretched, heavy with unspoken possibility. Then, with a quiet sigh, Ainali closed the distance, her lips brushing his in a hesitant kiss. It was soft at first, almost questioning, but the simple press of their mouths sent a jolt through Naren's entire body. He let out a trembling exhale and kissed her back, gently at first, then with more urgency as mutual hunger ignited. Her hands slid across his shoulders and then into his hair, fingers weaving through as she drew him closer. A surge of heat flooded him, and he wrapped an arm around her waist. Their bodies fit together in a way that felt simultaneously alien and natural. He was dimly aware of the shuttle's hum, the faint beep of the console, the infinite blackness outside the portholes. But all of it seemed distant compared to the warmth of her mouth against his. When they broke apart, gasping for air, he searched her eyes for any sign that this was a mistake. But instead, he saw relief, desire, and something like wonder. She pressed her forehead to his, her ear fins fluttering. "I've never, with a human," she whispered, the color of her markings shifting to a sensuous pink. He brushed his thumb across her lower lip. Me neither, he managed, voice laced with wry humor. The strangeness of the situation was not lost on him. But I can't pretend this doesn't feel real. She nodded, swallowing. We don't know what will happen, she admitted softly. We could drift for days and never be found. We could run out of fuel or be intercepted by more raiders. Or maybe we get rescued. And then what? Our worlds are so different. Naren let out a quiet laugh, cupping the back of her neck. One crisis at a time, he said. Let's just not be alone in this moment. She exhaled, her breath mingling with his. Agreed. Then she kissed him again, this time lingering, exploring him more fully. He let himself be lost in the sensation. Her lips were soft, but her touch was strong, confident, and the glow of her skin seemed to intensify where they touched. The shuttle's dim lights played across the swirling patterns that wrapped her arms and shoulders, like living tattoos that shimmered in response to emotion. Their combined heat built quickly, and soon he was dizzy with the rush of it all. Ainali's hands traced the lines of his chest, pushing aside his jacket. He responded by running his fingers along her sides, feeling the subtle ridges where her scales met smooth skin. Every new patch of her body told him she was undeniably alien, but the moan that escaped her throat when he brushed a sensitive spot was universal. She pressed closer, arching against him. Her cloak slid off, revealing more glowing patches along her back that pulsed softly. At some point, his hands found the small of her back, massaging gently where the tension lingered. She shivered, letting out a quiet sound of pleasure. Then, unexpectedly, she eased away from him, her breath ragged. He froze, concern flooding him. Are you okay? She nodded, eyes heavy-lidded, luminous markings flickering with intensity. Sorry, she said, running a hand through her hair. This is all so sudden. I want it. I want you. But it's not something I've done lightly. We're from different worlds, and I'm not sure what this means once we cross a certain line. Naren gently threaded his fingers through hers, giving a reassuring squeeze. We don't have to define it right now, he said quietly. I don't want you to feel any pressure. Whatever happens, we face it together. He meant it. The intensity of the desire pulsing through him was tempered by genuine care for her well-being. He wouldn't push her into anything she wasn't ready for. Her gaze softened, and she brought his hand to rest against her cheek again, her eyes shining in the half-light. Maybe we're both wounded souls, crashing into each other in a broken corner of the galaxy, she whispered. But for once it feels safe. She leaned in, pressing her lips to his wrist in a gentle, almost reverent gesture. Then she slipped closer, straddling his lap with unhurried movements. The heat of her body soaked through his clothes. He swallowed hard, placing his hands on her hips. He could feel her trembling slightly, which told him she felt the gravity of the moment as much as he did. Tentatively, he slid his palms upward, tracing the lines of her waist. The luminous markings brightened wherever he touched, as though responding to his caress. Their eyes locked, and time stretched. Her lips found his again, and this time there was a sense of shared surrender. They took their time, exploring the shape of each other's mouths, the taste of each other's skin. His hands roamed up her back, finding the edges of the glowing spots that danced along her shoulders. She let out a soft gasp when he pressed a gentle kiss to her neck, right where the swirling pattern glowed brightest. He felt her nails dig into his arms in response, sending a shiver through his frame. Then, as the moment deepened, she leaned back just enough to pull off the remnants of her garment, the scaled fabric sliding away. Naren caught his breath at the sight of her bared torso, lines of bioluminescence trailing down her chest and abdomen in a mesmerizing pattern. She was a tapestry of starry light and warm skin. He tried to speak, but words failed him. Instead, he brushed his lips along her collarbone, letting her soft gasps and the shifting glow of her markings guide him. She returned the favor, tugging off his jacket, then guiding him to remove his shirt, which was frayed and stained. Her curious, delicate touch explored the planes of his chest, pausing over old scars. He murmured an explanation about a long-ago crash, but she simply pressed her lips to each scar as if in silent benediction. It was an intimacy he hadn't experienced before, a tenderness that transcended words. As their kisses grew more urgent, they found themselves sliding onto the narrow bench, limbs tangled. Their breathing turned ragged, the hush of the shuttle broken only by soft moans and the gentle rustle of fabric. He was acutely aware of every point of contact with her glowing skin, the way her luminescent patterns seemed to flare when he touched particularly sensitive spots. The sensation of her body pressed to his, the heat, the racing hearts. They were locked in a moment of raw, urgent need to connect, to feel alive. When she whispered his name against his ear, it sent a surge of warmth through his entire body. He responded by kissing her deeply, fingers splayed along her bare back, feeling the shift and flex of her muscles. He marveled at the faint texture of the scales near her spine. It all added to the sense that she was both familiar and wondrously other. Soon, the bench proved too cramped, and they awkwardly laughed as they tried to adjust. Anali guided him onto the floor of the shuttle's small cabin, and he pulled her gently onto his lap again. She straddled him, her luminescent spots pressing against his chest. The glow lit his skin in a faint iridescent pattern. The feel of her naked body against his was dizzying, and he tried to ground himself in the moment, pressing slow kisses to her neck and shoulder. Her voice, breathless, broke the hush. "Naren," she said. "I want—" She didn't finish, but she didn't need to. He understood. Carefully, gently, they let their bodies align in a shared rhythm. He gripped her hips as she moved against him, and her head fell back, a soft cry escaping her lips. Their mutual desire peaked in waves, an exchange of gasps and murmurs as they found a unity that transcended species or background. In that instant, the station, the crash, the raiders, all of it fell away, leaving only the two of them clutching each other in desperate, sweet abandon. Their intimate dance stretched on, each moment a new discovery. Her glowing spots pulsed in time with her racing heartbeat, and when he pressed a hand to her chest, he could feel the flutter echo in his own. The friction of skin on skin, the mingling of their breaths, sent surges of sensation that spiraled higher. There was a rawness to their closeness, a sense that they were bearing not just their bodies but the turmoil and hope in their souls. When the final wave of pleasure washed over them, it left them breathless, collapsed in each other's arms on the shuttle's floor. The cabin felt both stiflingly small and limitless, as if the entire galaxy had condensed to this single moment. Anali draped an arm over his chest, her ear fins still trembling slightly. She pressed her forehead to his, luminous spots shining softly in the aftermath. They lay there in silence for a long time, just breathing, hearts pounding. Slowly, the world crept back in. The console beeped with a low fuel warning, and the hum of the engines reminded them of their precarious situation. Yet, for now, they were safe, alive, and entwined in a bond that felt both fragile and unbreakable. Eventually, Anali shifted, propping herself on an elbow. Her hair, slightly damp with sweat, clung to her forehead. "So," she said softly, voice trembling with the aftershock of emotion. "That happened?" Naren chuckled, the sound shaky. "Yeah," he managed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'm not complaining." There was a gentleness in his smile, a sense of awe. She smiled back, though her eyes were tinged with uncertainty. "We still have to figure out how to survive out here," she murmured, resting her head on his chest. "But maybe we can face it together." He hugged her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I'd like that," he said sincerely, letting his eyes close for a moment. The ache of injuries and exhaustion weighed on him, but for the first time in ages, he felt less alone, less adrift. There was no guarantee of rescue, no promise of a future that made sense. But as he held Anali in his arms, the weight of the galaxy felt a little easier to bear. They dozed in that haze of warmth and closeness, only to be awakened by a sudden beep from the console. Naren blinked, heart skipping a beat. "Incoming signal?" he said, voice thick with sleep. Anali scrambled upright, hastily wrapping herself in the discarded cloak, while Naren pulled on his pants. They dashed to the cockpit, adrenaline spiking anew. The screen flickered with a faint transmission. Static crackled, and then a garbled voice came through. Unknown shuttle, this is the cargo vessel Elysian. We received your distress call. Identify your status. Relief surged through them. Naren quickly punched in a response, voice unsteady. This is shuttle. Not sure the call sign. Requesting rescue. We're low on fuel and drifting. 2 souls on board. Please advise. The static cleared, and a calmer voice replied. We have your coordinates. Stand by for rendezvous in approximately 6 hours. We'll bring you aboard if you match safe docking protocols. Ainali let out a trembling sigh, tears pooling in her dark eyes. Naren gripped her hand, pressing a shaky kiss to her knuckles. They had done it. Rescue was on the way. But a swirl of questions still hovered in their future. What the cargo vessel would do upon discovering an alien exile, whether the crew would respect their autonomy, whether they could truly find freedom or remain fugitives from slavers. Still, it was a chance, and that was more than they'd had before. Those next 6 hours crept by, each moment an exercise in hope tempered with anxiety. They patched themselves up as best they could, redressed, tidied the shuttle's interior. Naren managed to coax a bit more life out of the navigation array, enough to align with the Elysian's approach vector. All the while, he and Ainali moved around each other with a newfound sense of closeness. A shared smile here, a gentle brush of hands there. Despite the uncertainty, they were a team. More than that, they were entwined in ways that defied the simple labels of human and alien. Finally, the Elysian came into view, a hulking freighter with battered hull plating but a working docking bay. Naren guided the shuttle into alignment, his heart pounding at the thought of meeting whoever was aboard. He remembered the old adage that sometimes rescue could be just another trap. But he glanced at Ainali, who watched the docking bay's doors open with a mix of fear and excitement, and he resolved to trust in possibility. They landed with a gentle bump, the shuttle's engines whining in protest. Once the systems powered down, Naren and Ainali stood by the hatch, exchanging a charged look. Ready? He asked, sliding a small handheld blaster into his belt just in case. She nodded, luminous spots shifting in color, equal parts courage and trepidation. The hatch hissed open to reveal a small group waiting in the Elysian's docking bay, a tall, stern-faced man with a scar across his jaw, a stocky woman with a data pad in hand, and a couple of crew members holding rifles at the ready. The woman with the data pad spoke first, her tone cautious. Welcome aboard the Elysian. We picked up your distress call. You'll be scanned for weapons and quarantined until we confirm you pose no threat. Naren raised his hands in a show of peace, stepping forward with Ainali at his side. Her posture was tense, but she kept her chin high. We're unarmed mostly, he said, removing his small blaster and setting it on the shuttle floor as a sign of good faith. He glanced at Ainali, who offered only a slight nod, the faint glow of her markings visible against the cloak's edge. We just escaped a slaver-infested station. The scarred man studied them with narrow eyes, his gaze lingering on Ainali. You're sure you weren't followed? Naren shook his head. Unlikely. We blasted out of there in a hurry. They're probably too busy dealing with each other to chase us. But we're not looking for trouble. Just a ride away from that hell. The woman with the data pad nodded, tapping notes. We're not a charity, but we can offer passage for a price or a favor. Let's go to the med bay, run some tests, and figure things out. Ainali's expression was unreadable, but her hand brushed Naren's. He gave her a subtle squeeze. Right now, trust was all they had. The crew escorted them deeper into the freighter, a drab interior of metal corridors, warning labels, and the constant hum of engines. The stocky woman led them to a small infirmary. Wait here, she said, gesturing to a pair of seats. I'm Oren, by the way, first mate. We'll try not to keep you in the dark, but protocols exist for a reason. Ainali perched on the edge of a seat, clearly uneasy. Naren sat beside her, leaning close to murmur. We'll be all right. She gave a tiny nod, her dark eyes flicking around warily. Her luminous markings had dimmed, as if she were trying not to attract extra attention. He rested a hand on her thigh, a small gesture of comfort. Minutes later, Oren returned with a scanning device. She carefully moved it around them, checking for pathogens or contraband. The scan beeped, and she pursed her lips. Nothing dangerous, she said. She eyed Anali's glow. You're an unusual species. Might cause some curiosity among the crew. Anali lifted her chin. I can handle curiosity. I just don't want trouble. Orin nodded, seeming to accept that. We're making a supply stop in about 3 days. We could drop you off at an inhabited world, or you can stay until we get to the nearest free port. That's in about 2 weeks. It'll cost you, though. Naren rubbed the back of his neck. Their finances were non-existent. Any credits he had were lost with his old ship. We can work, he said. I have piloting skills, repair skills. Anali's resourceful. We'll earn our keep. The first mate nodded, setting the data pad down. We'll see. Captain will decide. She likes people who can pull their weight. She gave them a measured look, then waved them to follow. Come on, we'll find you a temporary berth. Relief washed over Naren. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was better than drifting. He and Anali followed Orin down more narrow corridors until they reached an empty crew cabin. It was cramped, 2 bunks, a locker, a small table. But it was paradise compared to the station. Make yourselves comfortable, Orin said. We'll talk payment or work details once you've settled. She gave them a nod and left. When the door slid shut, Naren finally exhaled. He turned to Anali, who stood in the middle of the tiny cabin looking uncertain. He stepped forward and placed his hands on her shoulders. We're safe, he murmured, a statement that felt both true and not entirely certain. But she gave a short nod, leaning her head against his chest. After a long moment, she spoke, her voice soft. Thank you for not leaving me behind. For trusting me. He let out a quiet laugh, hugging her. You saved me. We saved each other. They stood like that for a few heartbeats, letting the tension of the day drift off. Then Naren guided her to the bunk, and they sat, shoulders touching. She looked around the Spartan room. Hard to believe we were on that station just, was it a day ago? It feels like a lifetime, he replied. But we made it off. Now we figure out the next step. He studied her profile, noticing how her markings had shifted to a gentle turquoise. We can't know what tomorrow holds, but if you'll let me, I'd like to keep facing it with you. Anali's eyes shimmered in the dim light. I'd like that too, she said. Wherever we go next, at least we know we're not alone. They lapsed into a comfortable silence, leaning on each other's shoulders. Outside the cabin door, the sound of the Elysian's engines rumbled softly, a lullaby of motion that reminded them they were adrift in the vastness of space, and yet together. Naren closed his eyes, replaying the impossible journey that had led here, the crash, the station's haunted corridors, the close calls with raiders, and the quiet moments of trust blossoming into something more. Despite everything, a sense of hope stirred in him. Hope that maybe they could carve out a life beyond the desperation they'd known. Eventually, the overhead lights dimmed to a low-power mode, indicating a simulated night cycle on the freighter. Naren realized how utterly exhausted he was. Yet the adrenaline of survival still lingered in his veins. He and Anali stretched out on the bunk. It was narrow, but they didn't mind. She rested her head on his shoulder, and he draped an arm around her. Are you all right? He asked softly, brushing his fingers through her hair. She let out a long breath. I have no idea, she admitted. I'm frightened of the unknown, of what it means for me to be traveling among humans again. Part of me wonders if I should just keep running, never attached to anything. But another part. She looked up at him, her luminous eyes catching what little light there was. Another part longs to stay close to someone who makes me feel safe. His chest tightened. You don't have to decide everything now, he whispered, pressing a tender kiss to her forehead. We'll figure it out. One day at a time. She nodded, letting her breath even out. They lay in silence, the hum of the ship lulling them into drowsiness. Before sleep claimed him, Naren felt Anali's arms slip around his waist, and she mumbled something in her language, words he didn't understand, but the tone was sweet and comforting. He pressed his lips to her temple in answer, drifting into dreams of starlight and possible tomorrows. When he next opened his eyes, the cabin lights had brightened slightly, simulating morning. A dull ache pulsed in his muscles from all the recent exertion, but it was offset by the warmth of Ainali curled against him. Her glow was faint, as if her body was at rest, but still present enough to cast gentle patterns on the bunk. He marveled at how peaceful she looked, ear fins relaxed, breathing slow and steady. He carefully slipped out from under her arm, trying not to wake her, and stood. He found a tiny sink in the cabin's corner to wash up, splashing water on his face. Studying his reflection in the mirror, he barely recognized the haunted look in his own eyes. So much had changed in just a few days. He felt older, raw, but also somehow renewed. The sense that he had something to live for beyond just the next job or the next credit was new and disorienting. A soft rustle made him glance back. Ainali was stirring, propping herself up on an elbow. Her hair was slightly tousled, her markings brightening as she woke. "Good morning," he said quietly. She rubbed her eyes, then offered a gentle smile. "Morning," she echoed. "Is this real?" He chuckled, leaning against the sink. "If it's a dream, I'm not complaining. But yes, I think it's real." She stretched, yawning, and then shifted to the edge of the bunk. "I suppose we should see what the crew needs from us." But she didn't move to get up right away. Instead, she studied him with a pensive expression. "Naren, thank you." She repeated the sentiment, more firmly. "I never expected to find someone I could trust, let alone feel this close to." He felt a wave of tenderness. "You don't have to thank me," he murmured, crossing the small space to take her hands in his. "But I want you to know I feel the same. You've given me a reason to think about tomorrow." She closed her eyes, letting his words sink in. "Then let's see what tomorrow brings," she said softly. With that, she stood, gathering her cloak around her shoulders. He retrieved his shirt and jacket, dressing quickly. They emerged from the cabin to find Oren waiting in the corridor, arms folded. "So you're alive?" she said brusquely. "The captain wants to talk." "She's in the command deck." Naren and Ainali exchanged a glance, then followed her through the freighter's dim corridors. Crew members shot them curious looks as they passed. Most eyes lingered on Ainali's glowing patterns, but no one made a move to harass them. Finally, they entered a cramped command center with a forward viewport showing the star-specked void. A middle-aged woman with silver-streaked hair turned from a console to eye them. She wore a weathered uniform that had seen better days. "So," the captain said, her voice carrying an air of quiet authority. "Our new refugees. Heard you had a run-in with some slavers out at Near Axis Station." Naren nodded. "We escaped just in time," he said, introducing himself. "And this is Ainali." He tried to keep his voice respectful but assertive. "We can work for passage if you'll have us. I can pilot, or do engine repairs." Ainali added. "I can help with repairs too, and I'm good at analyzing systems, scanning frequencies. I've adapted to a lot of technology to survive." The captain's gaze flicked over both of them, then she looked to Oren, who nodded in confirmation. "All right," the captain said, leaning against the console. "You can stay aboard. You work, you eat, and we'll drop you at a free port in a couple of weeks. Or if you prefer another stop sooner, that's your choice." Naren exhaled, relief flooding him. "Thank you, Captain." She waved him off. "I'm not running a charity, but I won't turn away competent hands. Just don't bring drama onto my ship." Her piercing gaze shifted to Ainali's glowing arms. "Whatever you are, you don't cause trouble and we'll be fine." Ainali bowed her head slightly. "I understand." "Good," said the captain. "Now get to the lower deck, there's a busted filtration unit. We can start your trial run by seeing if you can help fix it." They nodded, heading out with Oren to be shown the way. Once out of earshot, Naren brushed his shoulder against Ainali's, offering a small grin. She returned it, color shifting in her markings, a ripple of excitement. They were still adrift in many ways, but now they had a ship, a purpose, and at least a temporary safe harbor. The next few days passed in a blur of labor and adjustment. Naren spent long hours in the engine bay, learning the Elysian's quirks, patching worn-out drives. Ainali found her niche assisting the ship's lone comms officer. Her ability to sense subtle frequency changes made her an asset. They settled into the routine of ship life, meals in the cramped galley with the rest of the crew, bunking in their small cabin, the ever-present hum of the engines. Although some aboard regarded Ainali with caution, no one openly antagonized her. During the quiet intervals, Naren and Ainali found moments of solace together, sometimes stolen kisses in an empty corridor, other times lying side by side on the bunk, whispering hopes about what they might do if they reached a safer port. Their bond felt less like a feverish fling and more like a steady flame, warming them both against the cold realities of the galaxy. They learned snippets of each other's past. Naren shared stories of his time as a freelance pilot, the heartbreak of losing crewmates, the sense of drifting through life without anchor. Ainali revealed fragments of her homeworld, the turquoise seas, the glowlit grottos, the rigid clan structures that ultimately led to her exile. Each revelation brought them closer, forging trust from shared vulnerability. Finally, the day came when Orin announced they were approaching a major freeport, a bustling space station that served as a hub for trade and travelers from countless species. The Elysian would dock for a few days, offload cargo, and let the crew take on new supplies. Naren and Ainali were given the choice: stay aboard for the next leg of the journey or disembark and seek their fortune elsewhere. Naren paced the cabin, uncertain. Ainali sat on the bunk, the faint swirl of her markings indicating her own mix of anxiety and excitement. "What do you want to do?" he asked, coming to stand in front of her. She ran a hand through her dark hair, sighing. "This freeport might be safer than drifting. We could find legitimate work. Or," she hesitated, "or we could stay with the Elysian for a while longer, see if the next destination is better. I'm not sure. I just know I don't want to be separated from you." Those words sent a wave of warmth through him. He sank to one knee, taking her hands. "Same. But I also know we can't hide on this freighter forever. We should see if the Freeport can offer a fresh start. Slavers might not have the same influence there. We could carve out a life." He paused, searching her gaze. "Unless you'd rather keep moving?" She considered for a heartbeat, then slid down beside him, pressing her forehead to his. "A fresh start," she whispered, the color of her markings turning a hopeful shade of lavender. "I like how that sounds." They told the captain of their decision to leave. She didn't protest, simply wished them luck and reminded them of the times to which the Elysian would adhere before departure. As the massive Freeport station came into view, Naren and Ainali stood at one of the Elysian's portholes, watching the swirl of neon lights, the cluster of docking bays, the motley array of ships from every corner of the galaxy. A sense of possibility stirred, tempered by the knowledge that they were stepping into a new unknown. When they disembarked, the station's bustle hit them like a shockwave. Crowds of travelers and merchants, blinking advertisements in a dozen languages, scents of alien foods and the hum of conversation. Ainali stayed close to Naren, her ear fins twitching at the overload of sound. Her markings fluctuated, reflecting curiosity and apprehension. He placed a reassuring hand on her lower back, guiding her through the throng. "Welcome to the heart of chaos," he joked softly, trying to ease her nerves. She offered a small smile, letting him lead. They spent the next hours exploring the main concourses, searching for signs that might point them to lodging, employment, or a safe place to rest. Along the way, they encountered curious glances, but no one accosted Ainali. Freeport stations were known for their eclectic mix of species, so perhaps her luminescent features didn't stand out too much. Or maybe people were just too busy to care. Eventually, they found a modest hostel in a quieter sector of the station. The proprietor, a squat, amphibious alien, didn't ask too many questions once Naren showed the few credits he had left from short-term work aboard the Elysian. They got a small room with a single bed and a flickering overhead light. It was hardly luxurious, but it offered privacy and respite from the throng. That evening, they ventured into a small marketplace district to sample alien foods and see what kind of jobs might be posted on the local boards. Naren thought he could find work as a courier or pilot for short hops around the sector. Ainali was less certain, but she insisted she'd adapt. She was determined not to be a burden. At one point, while scanning a job terminal, Naren felt her slip her arm around his, leaning her head against his shoulder. The gesture was so tender and natural that it made his heart ache. They might not have all the answers, but they had each other. On their second day there, a group of rough-looking individuals trailed them in one of the corridors, likely unsavory opportunists seeing a new arrival with a female alien. Naren's pulse spiked, old fears of slavers returning. But Ainali met their gazes fearlessly, her markings flashing a sharp turquoise that hinted at readiness to defend herself. The men sneered but backed off when they saw Naren place a hand on his sidearm. The sense of solidarity between the two of them, standing side by side, unafraid, was enough to ward off any threat. Later that night, they curled up together in their small room, window revealing the neon-laced vastness of the Freeport's interior. Naren lay propped on one elbow, watching Ainali doze. Her face was peaceful in the dim light, luminous patterns softly glowing across her bare shoulders. He brushed a gentle thumb over her cheek, overwhelmed by a surge of gratitude that they'd made it here, survived everything. The memory of their first encounter in that haunted corridor felt like a lifetime ago. When she stirred, blinking up at him, he offered a soft smile. "Could you ever have imagined we'd come this far?" She shook her head, voice husky with sleep. "No. But I'm glad we did." She reached for him, and he settled beside her, letting the warmth of her embrace anchor him to the present. Their love was still new, precarious, forged in crisis, but it had grown in the face of danger and fear, and that made it feel unbreakable. They spent the next weeks on the Freeport station, slowly piecing together a life. Naren found odd jobs transporting cargo in small commuter vessels docked at the station, building a reputation for reliability. Ainali, with her knack for sensing frequencies, ended up assisting a local salvage outfit that specialized in scanning old wrecks for salvageable tech. Though it reminded her of Near-Axis Station, it also gave her a chance to reclaim that narrative, to salvage, rather than be salvaged herself. In the evenings they returned to their modest room, sometimes exhausted, sometimes exhilarated. They explored each other's bodies and souls with the same curiosity that had drawn them together in the station's corridors. Their intimacy remained a deeply personal sanctuary from the chaos of the galaxy. Sometimes they bantered, teased each other's quirks, or shared awkward laughter over cultural misunderstandings. Other times they simply lay in contented silence, each breath syncing with the other's. In those quiet moments, they both realized that what they shared was more than just a fleeting bond born of danger. It was a genuine connection rooted in mutual respect, passion, and the relief of having found someone who truly understood. Over time, they made new acquaintances on the station, beings of various species who accepted Ainali's bioluminescence as casually as they accepted Naren's scarred arms. The hustle of the Freeport began to feel less daunting, more like a tapestry in which they could weave their own story. They saved credits, took shifts that suited their skills, and debated what might come next, maybe buying a small ship of their own, exploring the galaxy together. Or possibly building a more permanent home here, in this bustling hive of commerce. One evening, after a particularly stressful day at work, they returned to their room with the takeaway meal they'd grabbed from a street vendor. Ainali collapsed on the bed, letting out a weary groan. "If I have to skin one more crate of broken navigation modules." She blew out a breath, hair ruffling around her face. Naren chuckled, flopping down beside her. "Better than being shot at by raiders, right?" She smirked, rolling onto her side to face him. "Marginally," she said, poking him lightly in the ribs. Then her gaze turned thoughtful. "I never saw myself doing this. Domestic chores, complaining about the daily grind. It's so ordinary. And yet, after everything we went through, it feels nice." He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "I never pictured myself here either, forging a life with someone who glows in the dark," he teased gently. Then he leaned in, pressing a slow, deliberate kiss to her lips. She closed her eyes, kissing him back with equal tenderness. "But I'm not complaining," he whispered when they broke apart. She traced the line of his jaw, her luminous markings brightening. Nor am I. They lingered in that moment, hearts full of a quiet certainty that they'd chosen the right path. Weeks turned into months, and their new life solidified. They found a larger room in the hostel, or rather the station's version of an apartment, a cramped single-room unit in a corridor that thrummed with passers-by at all hours. The walls were thin, and the overhead lights flickered if you ran the shower too long, but it was theirs. A small haven to return to, where Anali hung strips of luminescent fabric reminiscent of her homeworld's designs, and Naren scrounged up enough leftover paint to scrawl half-finished constellations on the ceiling. It was rough, chaotic, and utterly beautiful in its own way. Some nights, they sat by the single window in their unit, pressed close, watching ships dock and depart beyond the reinforced glass. In those reflective hours, they'd talk about the future, perhaps traveling to Anali's homeworld to find if there was any chance she could reconcile her exile, or venturing to the galaxy's frontier to chart new territory. The idea of exploring unknown ruins appealed to them both, a chance to turn the tragedy of Nearaxis Station into an adventure where they called the shots. Nothing was set, but the possibilities were endless. Their relationship deepened with each shared sunrise, or station cycle, each new challenge they tackled together. The emotional intimacy that had taken root in desperation now flourished in the relative peace of day-to-day life. They argued sometimes, over small things like who forgot to restock the ration packs or big things like whether to risk a dangerous salvage job for big credits. But the arguments always ended in mutual understanding, followed by soft apologies and, often, intense reconciliations that ended with them tangled in each other's arms, luminous patterns melding with the warmth of human touch. Then, one afternoon, an unexpected opportunity presented itself. The salvage outfit Anali worked for offered them a chance to pilot a short expedition to a partially intact space hulk orbiting a distant gas giant. The pay was decent, the risk moderate. Anali would be on the scanning team, Naren on the flight controls. It was precisely the type of job that suited both of them, and a chance to test their mettle away from the safety of the Freeport. They agreed almost immediately, hearts pounding with that familiar blend of excitement and trepidation. The morning of the departure, they packed their gear carefully, double-checking everything. Anali's luminous spots flickered with an eager glow that matched Naren's racing pulse. "Nervous?" he asked as they made their way to the docking bay. She smirked, ear fins twitching in anticipation. "A little. But mostly excited. Feels like we're stepping into our future, you know?" He grinned, taking her hand and squeezing it. "Yeah. Together." The words carried a promise that neither of them needed to articulate further. They'd been through hell, found each other, and now stood on the brink of a new adventure, one forged not by desperation, but by choice. They boarded the small salvage vessel with the rest of the crew. The engines fired up, thrusters vibrating beneath their feet, and soon the Freeport station fell away behind them. Naren guided the craft away, the star-dappled void welcoming them once again. Anali stood beside him at the cockpit console, her eyes shining with the reflection of stars, her luminescent markings pulsing softly. He couldn't resist leaning over to press a quick kiss to her cheek before focusing on the controls. As the ship accelerated, carrying them toward the unknown, Naren felt a calm certainty settle over him. Their journey might never be easy. They'd face slavers, corporations, betrayals, and the vast unpredictability of the galaxy. But in each other, they'd found courage and tenderness, a refuge that transcended species or circumstance. Their story wasn't one of ephemeral passion. They were building something real, shaped by shared hardships and bound by an affection neither had anticipated. Looking at Anali as she smiled at him, he knew that no matter what awaited them in the star-filled night, they would face it side by side, hearts alight with hope.